housekeeping. We're in this gorgeous black box theatre in Quincy called the West End Theatre, and we are so grateful to the theatre. Kate, thank you so much. Come and say hello so that the video captures you too.
Yeah.
So great, you've been such a help. And Earl, you're the president of the board of directors, yes? Thank you so much for hosting us. We're really grateful. And I want to thank Cara too, as executive director of Plumas Arts Council. It's fantastic. We've been really supportive. Thank you. And our work together was only just beginning. So I might start by introducing myself. I'm Liza Tudor, and I'm executive director of Plumas County Arts Council. And I serve the board of directors for Californians for the Arts and California Arts Advocates. And I'm here with you this evening representing one of 13 agencies across the state who've been selected to administer just under $3.5 million worth of funds to artists in Plumas Arts between February next year and September the following year. But within the upstate region, we'll talk a little bit about that. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Katrina Schneider, who is a scientist and has been working with us on some of the data, the narrative for which we'll share with you. We're not going to get too much into the data, we're just going to blow your minds. Anyway, the blowing your mind is Katrina. She's an incredible colleague. And then Gianna, who has just joined us, actually. She's our newest staff member at the Plumas County Arts Council, and she's going to be working with us as a project coordinator for the California Creative Force. So you'll be seeing more and hearing more from Gianna. Gianna, do you have a mic if you need it?
You should keep this one next to her. And we have Manny, who's our interpreter here.
So yes, we have Manny. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Does anybody need any Spanish interpretation this evening? Well, please, you're not going anywhere as far as I'm concerned. Stay with us. This might be of interest to you, and I hope it is. How about we just go around and say hello? Who's got the hands-free one? We'll start with Manny and then go around and introduce ourselves.
Here, we're going to be integrating the American Sign Language, but also in Spanish. So I'm actually interested in hearing what's the
Thanks, Manny.
My name is Nina, and I live in Quincy, and I look forward to listening to the presentation.
There's no maker.
Yeah.
You are a
It's a great volunteer. I'm Tiffany, and I wear a lot of hats. I'm currently working in workforce development, and I just sort of saw your thing come across. I wasn't exactly sure what it was, but I am a storyteller as well. I write and run a video production business with my husband, but I also do a lot of in line with that workforce development, kind of getting other people to go out on their own and kind of business out of their art. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks for being here.
Fantastic.
My name is Joe. I built it took me a long time, but it's all done, and we're happy to
Oh, you have created a gem in Quincy. Thank you for hosting us.
have you. Hello, I'm Patrick Parks. I'm one of the local theater talents here in Quincy. I'm a local, we're up here for the second grade. And I'm thrilled to be here for this presentation.
We're thrilled to brought you out of the cold.
Sorry to interrupt just for a second. Folks that are on Zoom are saying with the mics, it's actually hard for them to hear us.
Maybe because the owl's trying to.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if we should just speak up, or what are your thoughts, Eliza?
How much, if we don't use the mics, how much will these recordings pick up? A lot.
Yeah.
Perfect. So let's do away with the mics then.
Okay,
We'll just see.
ditching the mics. Is that better, Ray?
Yeah, much better. it was getting some echoing and kind of backfeed. It was kind of weird, but it sounds good. As people speak up, it sounds great.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for the feedback there, Zoom guys.
Hi, everyone, I'm Mandy. I'm a supporter of the arts, specifically like public art in Plumas County.
Oh,
And definitely like the Western Theater. Chicago was the best.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Liz Swindell. I am an artist and I own a gallery and retail space in Gray Eagle that hosts, we have 45 local regional artists in County. So I'm here excited about this conversation and to see what comes of it.
That's great. We drove through Gray Eagle today. I mean, it's just the drive between Nevada County and here was just gorgeous. Especially- Seriously, amazing.
Hello. I'm Kara Rocket Arsenault, and I'm the executive director at Plumas Arts. And co-hosting here tonight. I feel good. I kind of like it. Do we want to do are we getting started? So
We are.
I would like to do a land and people's acknowledgement. Plumas Arts would like to recognize that our work takes place on the occupied and unceded lands of the Mountain Maidu, who are the past, present, and future stewards of the land.
Thank you so much, Cara. So yes, of the many ways to look at the geography of upstate California, this is perhaps the first and most important, isn't it? I think everyone in the room acknowledges that. So we're here to talk with you about a new program called the California Creative Corps, which is the result of $60 million worth of workforce development funds, with the intention being to seed recovery and to spur the economy and to create social good within and without California. And it's a hugely ambitious, greatly innovative project. It's the first statewide program of its kind since the Workforce Programs Administration between the mid-30s and the mid-40s, the WPA. So when we speak about upstate California, we're also speaking about the idea that the nation is watching to see whether California Creative Corps is a pilot program that's going to really take off and succeed long-term and beyond the scope of the grant activity period. So the idea of the program is that we empower artists, we pay artists to go forth and create public awareness campaigns around issues that are critical to society. And those issues will look different in every community. You are the first community we have come to in Quincy, Plumas. So we hope that by sharing with you a little bit about what we've discovered of Plumas County, we will then turn it over to you and we'll have some active dialogue where you're leading the way. And we are recording you this evening. We're going to take everything we learn from every single one of the counties and distill it. And what you share with us now will inform the grant guidelines that we put together and create a program around. Does that sound good? So I want you to be incredibly talkative. So we're going to whiz through some basic stuff. When we talk about issues that are critical to society, it can look different in different places, but we're talking about water and energy conservation, climate mitigation, emergency preparedness and disaster response. Could be fire, it could be public health. We're talking about civic engagement, anything from election participation to the degree to which local communities participate in the census with all its flaws. We're talking about public health awareness. So let's get started. This is the map that California Arts Council has used to divide up the state into 7 regions? No, it's actually 9 regions, isn't it? Am I counting it?
The
8.
first one.
Okay, yes. So it's 8 regions. And you can see that they really vary. So down in the south, you can see San Diego, Los Angeles. There are only 2 counties that a single administering organization is responsible to. In upstate California, that's the yellow bit. You'll see that we're responsible for administering funds across 19 counties and some of the most diverse geography in the state. We've got a long coastline. Much of it, isn't it called the lost coastline? And then we have mountain ranges that converge and confluences of river systems and high deserts and low deserts and valleys and, you know, huge distances between us all. So, of course, there are many other ways. The map on the left shows the California Economic Resiliency Fund map, which is like California Creative Corps, a new pot of money that's been dedicated towards economic development, again, by the government. And he's divided the state up into these surf regions. And you can see that upstate California has both a North State region and a Red Coast region. And I'll get to why that's significant in a moment. And then the middle map shows, would you like to speak to the middle map and speak up for me?
Oh, yeah, well, there you're looking at a different hydrologic region, so if a drop of rain fell and came down the mountainside, where would it eventually flow out? Everything in the gray area is part of the coastal environment and actually flows out to the ocean. Everything in the green area floats out over into the Great Basin. And everything in the blue area, which the entirety of Plumas County is in, flows out eventually into the Sacramento River and down the Golden Gate Bridge. So their communities are often quite connected by being connected hydrologically.
Exactly. And then there's the map on the right, which shows the ways we're connected through public transport. Like if we have to get from Eureka to Shasta, we know we have to cross this bit of mountain in between them. So there are just so many ways of looking at how we connect, whether it's through economic regions, hydraulic regions, or by roads or other ways. So, I want to speak to my son really, really quickly. Can you all read it? Can you on Zoom read it? Can you, is it good?
I'm sharing this.
Wonderful. Okay, great.
Yeah. I mean,
It speaks for itself, doesn't it?
yeah, the quick is, I mean, you saw the map earlier that was breaking up the different regions and the task for the upstate area. It's not only so diverse, you know, with its physical conditions and everything, and you have areas with precipitation of 14 inches a year up to 95 inches a year over, you know, in Del Norte. Just huge range of elevation, huge range in populations. I mean, of course, we have a smaller population size, but within the counties, there's a very big range of counties. So, but biggest of all is like there's 19 counties here, and although we only represent 4.2% of California's population, we represent 31% of all of California's geography.
Fascinating, isn't it? So, how are we going to ensure local relevance with so much diversity in terms of geography and communities and place and sense of place and space? How are we going to ensure local relevance? So Nevada County Arts Council, being the administering organization, when we were writing our grant application to the state, thinking this is one hell of a big thing to bite off, we thought the most sensible thing for us to do is to work with our peer agencies across the entire upstate region. So we're a county arts council. Cara represents Plumas County Arts Council. Cara and I both report into our county board of supervisors, but we also report into the state through California Arts Council as part of a program called the State Local Partner Program. And it's one of the unique, it's one of the most unique programs actually across the nation. And we have accountability on all sides of us. We're one of the most accountable peer networks, if you like, within the state. So we thought, we're going to work with our county arts agencies and put everyone to work so that, you know, what we do and what we listen for remains relevant. So we are going to be introducing today a new tool which the state would like us to use in order to evaluate both the relative health of the communities that we serve as artists and the program in general, and it's called the Healthy Places Index. And through the Healthy Places Index, we hope to identify issues that are specific to Plumas. And of course, you know, there's the bit about, for heaven's sake, let's pay the artists, right, doing the work. So here I had to include this slide. You know, experiences related to health are often determined by factors beyond the individual. So however many vitamins we take, there are other factors that are contributing to our health, such as environment, policy, or culture. And the arts have a critical and accessible role to play in tackling community conditions. So here's the Healthy Places Index. And I want you to remember this. At the end, I'll remind you of this, but this is the most fascinating thing. Like, for those of you who have notebooks, write down healthyplacesindex.org. And maybe that's where we could write that into the chat of the Zoom as well, so that everyone has that link. It'd be great. This is a map like you've never seen before. You can see that the darker the area of blue, the least healthy the community. The darker the areas that are green, the more healthy they are. So what can you see? Can you draw any sort of conclusions, just briefly looking at this map?
Population.
Yeah, I like more light blue, but it's 18,000 people in Plumas County across 100 miles.
Right.
So I don't know how light blue compares to dark green.
Yes, exactly. So light blue is in the second to lowest quartile of the Healthy Places Index. So it's kind of on the way to being pretty unhealthy, but it's not dark blue, which is the least healthy. But we're going to be going in a little bit more into this because it's like, it's somewhat beguiling.
What's the criteria that you?
Yeah. It's a good question.
Why?
I mean, I'm sure you're gonna answer it. But
We are, I'm gonna get to that, but I'm gonna keep you in suspense for just a moment longer. Tell us what this shows, Katrina.
A closer up view here for the upstate region was just, and know that this is one glimpse into the data. And again, this is data that we've been asked to use and look at, but it was created by the
The Public Health Alliance in California.
Thank you. I knew she had it. So and so just as a quick blurb, these are the census tracts here. And so the total amount of census tracts we have within our region, this is the proportion that land in the dark blue, the 0 to 25 percentile. And the light blue obviously is 25 to 50 and so forth. A quick explanation as we go through these so you understand. A percentile basically is a way of looking at a tract relative to all the other tracts within California. So if you land at and then there's different metrics for determining this. This is a conglomerate one. The one that's an indice for just that tract is one that sort of has some algorithm they're using. And again, we don't know the exact equation they use, but that they had, we're going to go through some of these variables in a little bit, but they use all those to sum up this healthy place score. This is the next square. I didn't know if you were going to mix this, right? I don't know. I know.
The second guessing.
Yeah.
But you can see that upstate California doesn't look that healthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to find some very interesting ways that we can tackle this together. We're also going to be looking at when we consider how to fund grants, and we need there to be some acknowledgement of, you know, historically underrepresented voices and communities, whether that's racial, cultural, and the Healthy Places Index shows us in each community the makeup of that particular tract. When we burrow down into the Healthy Places Index, we're going to be looking at tract by tract. Tract refers to a census tract. We didn't make this stuff up. That's what it defaults to. More to follow. So here's an example. Do you want to speak to this? For Plumas County, we've landed on Plumas.
So there's a total of 7 census tracts, and before we even jump into the Healthy Places Index. I just did this, there was a synopsis here of just trying to look at what the overall. Environment, the overall physical conditions of here were, the fact that, where the river systems, the different rivers, how much of it's federal lands, because that obviously plays a role as well. And we went through.
How does it play a role that there's a high percentage of federal land, for example?
Well, that's part of what I think a discussion point. I know there's some
Yeah.
brainstorming as to how that has impacted different aspects of employment levels, employment possibilities, different pieces, but this is part of the listening.
I know there's so much in here. It's incredibly rich. When you yourselves later get home, because I know you can't wait to spend your evening looking at the Healthy Places Index. You yourself will generate all kinds of questions. Here are some more maps. Do you want to speak to these?
Yeah, again, just looking at the glimpse, this is the closer up of looking exactly where those federal lands come in, looking at also. Part of why I wanted to particularly highlight the different state parks. There's a quite an abundance here, obviously, in Plumas. And that's, a huge resource to capitalize on within communities identity. I feel like to some degree, there's I'm just gonna highlight directly here. There is a metric within the Healthy Places Index, and it looks at access to parks. It's sort of strange sometimes to look at a place like Plumas and see lower scores in terms of access to parks.
That's not amazing.
Exactly, well, so you know,
See, yeah, you don't. We're just looking at this data and thinking, that's
Yeah.
weird.
Well, when you look at a
gorgeous
map that
stuff.
shows all this, and so there's a way, it's like, okay, so what's that really about? So people aren't able to get to them. Why can't they get there? But would love to.
Yeah.
Why? Yeah.
Fascinating. And what's this, Katrina?
So then this is the fire history map, looking at fire over time.
Please continue.
Okay.
You guys are doing phenomenal.
So that, the fire history map, so an area like here, obviously, same with our county where we come from. A huge history, but you have particularly been hit with massive fires. So that's a huge part of sense of place and what's happening in the future, what's changing with climate, what's changing with temperatures. How is that fitting in the landscape here and the habitability of being here and people's sense of place, sense of home?
And I will mention that one of the reasons that we applied, we have a personal interest, organizationally personally interest in applying for this grant is that in Nevada County, we've just completed a 3-year program funded by multiple partners, but seed funded by California Arts Council, a $400,000 program that charted the 13,000-year history of the Sierra, Northern Central Sierra and mankind's relationship through the Washoe tribe. And 19 artists involved across multiple disciplines, a creative placemaking program. And when I first read the guidelines to become an administering organization for the California Creative Corps, I thought, this is a perfect example of the kind of work that can be done if funded, where you work across sectors. It's not just artists working with artists, it's artists working with universities, with public departments, with chambers of commerce, with fire departments, and land people. So,
yeah, so we're going to go in a second. We're going to look at some of the specifics. This is a synopsis of going through every tract within Plumas County and some of the observations. We talked about, I just want to really quickly, because we're going to keep talking about percentiles. So when they say that when it comes through with a cumulative score of the 55.4 percentile, basically that means that Plumas County lands where there are 55.4% of communities in California have poorer conditions than here. Again, that is a conglomerate. So when you break that down and look at some specific factors, there's things like looking at economic indices like per capita income. Here's a summary where you can look at the highest and lowest per capita income in Plumas County tracts. Also the social, looking at census response rates and how much that can drive the dark blue, because all the tracks in Plumas County are dark blue in terms of social scores, except for the PC area. Retail density, access to retail density that also relates to employment.
Yeah, it tells you so much. It's very interesting. So track 4 has the lowest overall healthy places index score. Why is this? Should we have a look? Can we speak to this?
Yeah. So when you go in first, as you look at the different factors right here, as you go into economic to look at what's driving, again, you can see the primary one that's bringing the score is the employment levels. This, I believe the next slide takes us through on this one. No, but anyway, as you go further in, there's another tab you can click, you can look more into employment. It's measuring the number of people at 25 to 64 with a job, and it landed at that.
On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see some measures. Can you see education, social, transportation, neighborhood, housing, and clean environment? Those are what we call policy action areas. Those are things which the Public Health Alliance of California has identified as affecting the community's health. Access to education, access to social lives, access to transportation. And each one of these little drop-down arrows, you can see where that little red is circled, then leads you to better understand what it is about housing, for example, in this case. And you can see immediately when it opens up that housing habitability is at the lowest possible part of the lowest quartile of the healthy places index. It cannot get less healthy for this particular area of Plumas County. So it tells us a lot. And so these, when I look at these, I think, that's a clue for an artist. How can we work with artists in Plumas County to come up with projects that sort of throw a light on this in some way? Is it working with a housing commission? Is it working with a social service organization for unhoused people? What is it? So we don't necessarily have the answers. We're here to inspire thinking along these lines. And here we go. Tract 5.02 has the lowest overall HPI score in this county. And that's like a look at why. Incredible unemployment in this particular tract. Do you see that middle one? So it says above poverty, employed, and per capita income. And it's the employment levels that are pulling that down, making it pale blue rather than pale or dark green. Does that make sense?
Well, I particularly want to highlight on this one, it's actually a very high percentile for per capita income. That's almost right there in dark green. So we have such,
So what's that contradiction?
yeah, so that's again, something.
That's the landscape, that's like north of the Feather River, before Chester, next to Elmore. So like care of the bottom line is the Feather down in the canyon, nothing north of that.
And it
And
has,
then around in Chester, so it's like Clear Creek, and then it must cut out Westwood. There's like Clear Creek and maybe whatever's on the west side of Almanor.
That's
Yeah.
what I was just, I'm not understanding, you clarify the tracks, are the tracks geographically based?
census, they're census tract based, so that's how the census, so obviously they
But-
come.
Tied to geography.
It's a good
I
question.
think that's a question
yeah.
we need to find out. Why census? Why is the census?
Well, actually, she's also saying, how did they determine the boundaries
Exactly.
for the census?
Yeah.
Because the first slide that you showed when you started talking about tracks, I thought there were different tracks based on like social factor.
No, they're always,
It's all the census
This,
data.
this track is probably 85–90% of public. Like looking at that right now, it's all north of the Feather River. It doesn't include Chester. It doesn't include Greenville. I don't know,
Includes like Alpha River.
does it? Can you see that?
Probably.
Probably. Yeah, it's hard without roads or lakes.
Well, this is gonna be what's interesting. So when you work with us now, so when you go to an area, you can zoom in and out and the roads get their names.
Oh, yeah.
So you
yes,
have
so
to.
you will be able to,
Yeah.
we're giving you the very high level stuff, but you're
These are
gonna
all
get,
screenshots.
hopefully you're gonna go away feeling both excited and intensely frustrated by us. To the extent To the extent that you have no option but to educate yourselves beyond what we could ever tell you about yourselves.
But for me, it really stands out that the percentage of people that are employed stand at, that's 98.6% of communities have higher employment of age 21 to 64-year-olds.
There's probably 20 people in that.
It's percentage, it's not.
There.
No, it's not to people who
Yeah.
are employment age. That's
Yeah.
the thing, of the people who are able to be employed, only 1% of them are.
Well, that's actually 1%.
1%, 58% of them are.
Well, I wonder if that's somewhere you go. If you don't want to.
Yeah, exactly. So this is why we're highlighting it, so that you can come up with like why that might be. So let's see.
Yeah, so this is, so just to say, you probably wondered what the, you probably wondered what the stripy areas are, the bit that looks like old fashioned pajamas. So, those are called, those are called exclusion zones. And that's where the Healthy Places, the Public Health Alliance of California have decided that not enough people, under 1,500 people live in those areas, and that therefore they can't draw reasonable, they can't use the data. There's not enough critical mass there. Or in some cases in California, Katrina's found that's where there are sort of areas that are dominated by a state prison, which has dormitory style living in it, or an elderly person's home, or something like that. And they're not counting those areas. They're called exclusion zones. Whether or not they're right to exclude them is another thing. I'm in two minds about that.
Anything in Susanville that has 3%.
It must be, it's gotta be a relationship, which,
That's unassuming from right is.
yeah.
It's pretty. That's under that square.
Yes, I think it's under the square. So here, in this particular tract.
You're gonna have so much fun with it.
I know. I can tell already. We're expecting applications from you. Okay, so in this particular track, you can see that social is like really down there in the dark blue, and transportation's not looking great either. So let's look at social. You can see that the indicators that measure social components are the degree to which folks have participated in the census, and the degree to which folks are participating in our election systems.
But this is again, one of those things, look at that, it's incredibly high percentage of people often, seeing this, like, so what's going on that people, they're voting, but they're not doing census, and again, understanding, this is again revealing something. Other areas we've seen in the low in both, so it's understanding your community conditions. We're looking at what.
Wonderful. And we don't have many more. I think we're just coming to the end of our slides, and then we're going to start having a conversation. And when we get to that, I'd really love to encourage those who are on Zoom to contribute their ideas in the chat. So other things that we're considering right now. So the grant program has not yet been developed by us. That's why we're doing a listening tour that will help inform how we think about it. So some of the things that we're considering in terms of equitable distribution of funding across this vast area are, the county density of unhealthy area tracts, i.e. the communities that fall within the lowest quartile of the HPI, that's the dark blue bits, the county population, its geographic size, county tribal and ethnic considerations of composition, the overall proposal strength, likely longevity or sustainability of the projects beyond the scope of the grant period, the ability to apply the project as a model for other counties. Like, is this the kind of, when you're thinking about the kind of project you want to apply for funding for, is this something that could easily be replicated in other communities across the state, across other counties within upstate region, or even across the county? Could someone come along and see this as an excellent case study? And the ability to apply for cross-county collaboration. If we were to divide up the funds, 3.3 million between 19 counties, I think it's about 140,000. But wouldn't it be more interesting to think of an equitable distribution in a slightly different way with these things taking these things into account? we're thinking also of, you know, the relative sizes of grants. Should we just create grants that are tiny and easy to apply for and less competitive and everyone's happy? Will those be enough? Should we put aside some money with many more dollars attached to it to create something of incredible impact, maybe with more concrete foundational partnerships between sectors and artists? We want you to be working with sectors. Part of the WPA program of the 30s and 40s, the success of it came from the fact that it was the government, the federal government, that was putting artists to work in unusual areas as it came out of a depression. How can artists help create something vital and positive and fresh? And then again, cross-country, regional size grants. So you can see that there's a lot we're thinking about. Okay, this is where the fun starts. Over to you. Give us your thoughts on data for Plumas. How does it compare with what you see on the ground here? What's missing and who isn't here at the table? Had we been a larger group, I might have suggested that we gather in smaller groups. We break up and mix it up between sectors and artists, but I think we're enough to stay together. What do you think? Yeah, and then we'll, you know, what we'd love you to do is to share some of your ideas, and we'd like to write them down if at all possible. So I might take this. Would you like me to stop this and create some kind of note, or because you need this for? Because I'm taking notes. You're taking notes, that's brilliant. I'm like, love, no, I want to keep this slide up actually, because I want everyone on the Zoom to see it. And I'd love to have, because we're recording the Zoom, I'd love to see questions and thoughts and ideas come from folks who are also attending remotely. Don't hold back, your ideas won't be lost. So from everything you've heard us speak about, what comes to mind for you? What do you think we should do? How should we create this program? Come on, Patrick.
What do you think would excite this community? What are some ideas?
Good Lord, that data uses a lot of nuance.
Yes.
That is the
Yeah.
thing that like
Yeah.
astounds me of like. Not even
Yes.
nuance, but like facts of life living here.
The-
Like, yeah, Quincy is missed for the
The
biggest.
fact that high income is from Lake Elmore people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And Grego, and Grego.
and Grego.
But
Yeah.
also it was like, why doesn't, I mean, like Quincy's the county seat, but we're not in town, and why are we right over? And like, I didn't understand, you all didn't make the data. But like,
No, it's like Berry Creek, it's basically Feather River Ranger District that was graded. So like if you go over Bucks
gotcha,
down to
that makes
Berry
sense.
Creek, it
Like,
doesn't have enough people.
Yeah,
yeah, that, I think. Yeah, for me, it's like. The data is really interesting. How it doesn't, at least for me, reflect. What it's like. Here, and I live in a lot of places in Madison County, but I know I started with like.
is
We're not-
everyone warm enough?
Oh, yes, very much. Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So.
What do you think, Tiffany?
So for me, this is really exciting. It's funny, again, I'm gonna be totally transparent. I wasn't exactly sure what you guys were doing here, my invite yesterday. But for me, it's very exciting. I am in strong workforce stuff with community colleges, but it's all for technical education stuff. This sort of seems almost like a parallel, but just for artists, which is really exciting. And I think what people will get excited about, to answer your question in this community, I don't know what your name, I'm sorry, Katrina. To answer that question, I think that this area has a ton of stories to tell. And you said, you know, the fact that, and that's interesting, I'd heard that 70% of the land was federal land, but 90%.
90% is surprising to me as well. I've always known,
I
I thought it
thought-
was 70.
So I've Googled it a few
Oh,
times.
oh,
So I've Googled it a few times here, but the thing is, audits have had the dangerous thing of not fact checking Wikipedia and places, so I'd love, yeah,
Well, that's okay.
but either way.
But
Yes.
anyways, either way, you're correct, and that is part of the identity, and I know a few of us have sat on, you know, whether it's tourism committees or workforce development or whatever. You know, and that comes up a lot, about how we can sort of communicate our identity and strengths and what makes us attractive to the rest of, you know, the state and world. But, so anyways, you asked the exciting thing, to me, what I get excited about is the storytelling piece, right? Like, how can we create, weren't you involved in, there was somebody that wanted to create a theater downtown, right? In the Dangerly Park, it was a high school student, I thought, for some reason, I thought you were down, but you didn't. Or like
I've
the
heard about it, but it wasn't-
concert.
Tristan, it's moving forward again.
Yes, which is very exciting. So like, yeah, like public art, like community spaces to gather, you know, and telling our history and, you know, through murals, through signage, through,
It's like Plumas County under the numbers. Those numbers make it feel like it's fucking miserable to live here, and that's not true. For some of us, are people struggling in Plumas County? 100%. But those numbers are really surprising to me, but it also makes sense because of our small rural, like Plumas County isn't even rural, we're one tier above the frontier, and so we kind of break all the metrics, which we don't. It doesn't, to go LA to here, like, we're gonna blow up your metrics, and so like, let's take the veil off that, and here's what it actually is.
but can I say one more thing? So you were asking, like, you know, you're trying to design it, how do we make it affordable, and how do we reach those people that are traditionally left out, right? And so I'm looking at your map and, right, and so it's like, maybe things can be weighted, right? So that like, if a community doesn't, they're not the bright vibrant green, right? They're the lower blue or the bright blue, right? Cannot like be higher weighted, right? Because we do, it would be so wonderful, like if you live in San Francisco or Sacramento, there's so much access to opportunity. And I feel this is exciting, you know, to people I know, right? It's like, oh, cool, you can get funding. It's those projects that are like, oh, this would be so cool if I just had this money. Right? I know for us, we are, you know, an artistic household that's self-employed, and it's always like, there's so many cool ideas that we have, but we have to feed our family. So that's always that balance. So, you know, if they could be weighted, like, you know, you could have some of it be like larger dollar amounts, you know, that could make that impact, you know, create. It's interesting when you go back to the fact that it's 70% Forest Service land, right? Because I know for Syracuse, they've applied for grant funding, they actually can't get funding because it looks like all of, we have access to all these parks, but there's not access to it. But that we fall through the cracks in the funding and have an experience. But anyways, back to my point, sorry. So if you could have these, some of it, sure, do micro grants, which would be great and empower a lot of people, but then have some that's earmarked for like larger, you know, huge impact type projects. That would be what I would see. Love it. Sorry, that was very inarticulate. No, I love it. I love it. I hope that this camera's working too, so every
Yeah.
time one of you speaks, I'm hoping that we capture you. Because we're gonna. We're gonna tear what do you do in your?
Yeah, good question. I just broke up with who I did things with. I was the trails director for 7 years here in town. For Sierra Beach Trail Stewardship, which is why I know the data and which is why I know the maps really well.
Yeah.
And which is why I know that. And also I'm a Plumas County fanatic in the sense of we do break the metrics. Like we don't fit nicely, and I've seen whether it's like the state grants or even like just kind of how people like discuss us. Or even our tax base, whether it's 70 or 90%, with federal lands, that's like a missed tax base for us. The reason why we don't have any parks, don't have public transportation in public lands. Like,
So
Plumas
that's
Eureka,
something immediately, that's an issue that is solvable, isn't it?
yeah, and one cool thing that you'll appreciate is our bus now goes to Reno once a week.
Once a week.
But more importantly, someone mysteriously cleaned the Kenny bus stop. It makes me
Gail
happy every day.
Francis.
Gail, yeah.
Oh,
Great
gorgeous.
job.
Gorgeous, I
Yeah.
love it, so it draws attention to the public transport, I love it.
Yeah.
I can't help wanting to call Patrick, because Patrick thought that he had come to, hang out before, he's been booted from the theatre tonight. And, and so I said, I'm gonna have to insist that you sit with us, and particularly because I love theatre so much. So Patrick, when we think about this, like, and everyone help out here, you know, how could this work, not just with public art, but also, you know, theatre folks as well? Is there something, perhaps it's connected with the storytelling? Perhaps it's a traveling theatre show that goes to some of the most remote places that would never otherwise come in and enjoy the Black Box Theatre here. I'm thinking, how do we give access? I'm interested to know your thoughts on this too. I know that you're here to interpret and translate tonight, but tell us about you.
Well, I'm just here absorbing everything. But I just moved here about a year ago. Never heard of Quincy until I went to Chico and was driving here through work. I ended up moving up here because I didn't, you know, like just everything that's around here, lakes, the trails for hiking, biking, and also the river. So moving up here, a lot of the stuff that did attract me was a lot of the outdoor stuff. But yeah, as everything you mentioned, there was a lot of maybe issues with getting here, transportation, maybe sometimes not even like being so advertised, I guess, outside of Plumas County. It's just even when I go to Reno and say, hello, I'm from Quincy, and they're like, oh, I've heard of it, but not really. If people know what's actually here, I think a lot of people will come and just kind of, you know, see the beauty it has to offer here in Plumas County and Quincy. So, I mean, I think that could be kind of like the things of just getting more out there and exactly what's surrounding area in Plumas County.
So kind of educate
Exactly.
people more. And am I understanding it right, that your sort of center of gravity is more connected with Reno as a significant urban center than, I don't know, what would be the thing over here in California?
That's on New York, it's Chico or Reno, it's like half and half.
Okay, right in between.
Like an hour, 45, hour and a half.
But the canyon is really big.
What do you mean? That sounds so mysterious.
Please do.
Dangerous.
Yuba County Fire.
I want to do it immediately.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It used to be a lot more beautiful. Unfortunately, that fire map that you showed, the canyon was devastated, and it used to be an hour and 20 minutes to get to Chico, and now it can take you anywhere from 2 hours to maybe 3. We had a massive landslide. I mean, it's the stuff that.
It was closed for 4 months.
Yes.
After the fire.
And
We had
then
a
the
big
rain.
rainstorm,
Yeah.
you know.
It did make Quincy on the way to nowhere.
Yeah.
And we already
It
are.
ruined everything.
So,
The-
so is there a story there? I mean, I was speaking with the Kara's equivalent. She's the executive director of Siskiyou Arts Council, who of course had these horrendous Klamath fires. And she said that 90% of the BIPOC community in Wairika and the surrounding areas, their homes were just wiped out. Only 10% of the BIPOC community now, and they've left the county. And I said, but that's got to be a story. That's so awful that would happen. Because they're already an underrepresented community and suddenly they're homeless and have to leave. That's terrible. So remember this project is also looking to fund projects that point to the fact that upstate California is at risk of catastrophic flooding. You know, is there a way that you would like to create projects that draw attention to fire safety, stewardship, proper stewardship? What does it look like for Plumas County? And is there a story around what's happened already?
So it's something that we really need to be shared, just tiny a bit more about forest fires.
I'm just gonna interrupt too for a second. We have Ray here and he wants to speak, and I think since we're
Nice,
so
cool.
small, I'm just,
Yeah.
okay, Ray. Over to you now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, guys, hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, good, awesome. All right, so Butte County, we're gonna be doing one of these on the 10th of November. But in hearing this, two things came up, and I have to confess, I've been talking, we've got a bunch of arts in the schools programs that are happening at the Butte County Office of Education, and I immediately thought of the really rural areas, which to me are unfairly dark blue. I lived very rural for a long time. I chose to live that way. And, you know, I know that doesn't always chart well, but I look at that as more art or arts orientation into schools as guest artists or something, if that was a possibility in some of the grant funding, which could help employ some artists to come in and help on that thing. And I also love the idea of the big, I mean, Plumas County is a big open area with a lot of destinations to go to, whether it's Quincy or Chester or Gray Eagle. And on the way are these gorgeous places. And I've talked about this before. You drive up I-5 and you see that giant bighorn steer on the side of the road. And it just can't help make you feel good. And now they've added like a baby steer. And it's just one of those kind of crazy things that after seeing things that might offend you and you think, my God, what's this country coming to? And you see that and you're like, wow, this is really cool. And as you were talking about Highway 70, which I've gotten to know very well in the last 2 weeks, I think I've been up and down 8 times. I'm thinking like a statue of a Maidu standing up there. Doesn't have to be Ishi, but you get the idea. Or, a mountain lot. But, there's so much little hidden public art things that could go. To me, that's what I love. And just ideas for possible projects. But I can't remember who said it. I think you need a large chunk for a big public art thing that is going to serve the community, because everybody moves around in Plumas County. It's not like, oh, I only shop in Chester. Well, you can't. You shop everywhere, right? Because you got to move around. So anyway, thank you. And I love this.
Ray, thank you so much. So Ray works for the Butte County Arts Council, which is called Friends of Upstate. And of course, they have had, just in relation to fire alone, they've had the Paradise Fire, massive migration of populations from one city to another, incredible homelessness, crime went up, just misery. And so there are so many potential projects that one could think of. But I just did want to point out the fire thing, climate mitigation is huge, So what can we do? How can we make that a gorgeous challenge? How are we doing?
I'll just add a quick thing to that, because we had this idea after the campfire and of course you have the similar thing on Highway 70. They cleared a lot of trees up, but some of those trees are not going to be cleared out. They're going to stand, and they might be a 20 or 40 foot trunk. Wouldn't that be a great area for 20 wood sculptures to come in and carve those? And just, they're there as long as they're there.
I love it. I love it, because it's a resource that would completely go to waste otherwise.
Right, and you're going to go past it, and it's going to give you resilience, it's going to give you compassion, and it's going to give you pride. It's just kind of a cool idea. Anyway, I got a million of them.
I love that. Resilience and pride and empathy. Was it that those are 3 things? What we can call
Humility.
humility.
He didn't say that, but I was saying,
Yeah.
there's a way we have to be really humble to what's happening with the planet right now. The fire.
So a theme that I really like in Plumas County, I'm gonna let all you creatives figure out. explain this, show this, is like Plumas County for me, and the numbers kind of reflect this. We're not ethnically diverse. Very much, but we are economically, politically, and spiritually diverse, and like life experience diverse. And so like people always tell, I'm like, our land, you're right, we have really cool mountains and peaks, but like for me, Plumas County, it's also the communities here.
I got political, economically, spiritually, and this one, sorry.
I think that's it.
Now you have one more.
Well, it's
Economical,
basically like,
political,
it's like you gotta be nice to everyone, just like to pull you out of the ditch.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think one thing, and that is my personal favorite thing as I walk is like the white woman from Plumas County. But like, how do we, like, yes, we show our lands, but also show like, for me, it's the lands and the people that keep me here. Like, it's not, and for me, that the joy even goes to it. And so now you all can come up with creative ways to show that.
We just keep having this conversation about division. Like, yeah, art is a catalyst, community, and
So, yeah. And like, I think when a lot of like states, when people talk about Plumas County, it is like, oh, we're this big land mass and there's not a lot of people, but like, how do those two things interconnect?
Can I ask you to speak right up, because you're being recorded, and what you say is special and precious to us.
Okay, well, something I've been thinking about previously too, and let's just think about it in a post, I know we're not past COVID, but I guess post-pandemic lockdown, and now in a, I guess, COVID is here to stay, but you understand the lack of language, the post-COVID world in rural areas and how that affected our land use during that time, how it affected our economy, and yet often how everything was closed. So people weren't really adding to the economy, but coming up here and now buying, second homes in the Bay Area when we already have a housing crisis. And I think that there's perhaps like a story there as far as, I think what's also interesting is there is so many opportunities for a recreation-based economy. And that's really exciting, and I think that's already here. However, I think that there's also just based on like how much gear costs, there's kind of a correlation between wealth and the amount like who's recreating. And I think that there is disparity there, and I think that growing up here, while my community as an adult here is probably not, like you were saying, it's not necessarily representative of what we're seeing here. If I was to pull like my high school class who still lives here, and the other thing that's also, I think, important to think about is the people who are probably really represented in these slides, they're also not here. They don't come to these kinds of meetings. They're not invested in these kind of conversations. Why that is, that's really multifaceted. But I think, remembering that people that tend to also want to have these conversations are people who are educated and involved and tend to have money because they have the time and they're not as stressed out after work. So they want to come, does that make sense? So there's like, I think that I do see that disparity in Plumas County when it kind of comes to people who maybe aren't really like, I'm going to this conversation.
Missing voices.
Yeah, I mean, it's missing voices. I'm trying to say like why that's missing, right? Because it's like, I can't talk about art when I can't like feed my family. And I'm not trying to say that Plumas County is incredibly rich with, but I'm not saying that everyone just, I'm not saying that. I just think that like there is that, I don't think that this is like the most unhealthy place to live, but I also think we have a huge lack of mental health resources. Our public health resources are really underfunded. We have a pretty big drug problem, I guess, the drug use up here. There's, a housing shortage. So I think that there are these serious issues, and then compounded with fire and, the climate refugees basically at this point, and people who I think that we do have a lot of problems, and I just think that it's worth, in everything else we're talking about and looking at this data, is thinking about well, where maybe it's not coming from. And I think even just like public health and, you know, like our behavior, like we just don't have enough therapists here. And how did that come into the conversation and along with transportation?
This is, it's pure gold, honestly, it's pure gold. I just learned so much. I love it. And we're writing it down. I can see Gianna writing, I can see Katrina writing. We have 3 videos trained on it. So we're really, really listening. But ultimately, we're going to turn it back to you to come up with projects. You know, I hope that you all stay in touch after this meeting. So I feel like we'll always remember this conversation. You're literally the first group of people that we have spoken to in upstate California. And we're going to go, you know, from where are we tomorrow night?
Lesson.
In Susanville, and then we're up in Alturas and Modoc the next night. And then we go to 3 other counties next week, 5 the next, and by Thanksgiving we'll have almost been to every county. And,
Where are you in Washington?
Susanville, at
yes,
the art gallery there,
The
the
art
Plumas Arts Council Art Gallery,
Yes, please reach out to people.
or
Yes.
lesson.
yes. I mean, seriously, if any one of you want to join us again, having had more ideas or percolated more questions or whatever,
And remembering as well, the collaboration between counties taking.
Totally.
It's just to me, it makes so much sense. And that includes entire upstate region, it includes health. I mean, it's applying things that have worked elsewhere, somewhere else, partnering with people that already know about it, who can come in and help mentor, bringing that in, you doing that, and there's so many possibilities.
I was just gonna add just one other thing. My mom just said this yesterday, and this is really, this isn't trying to be down, this is just all stories to think about. Like, our school district, I think, is one of the lowest paying school districts in California. That has huge ramifications. We're trying to get teachers to come up here. How, like, I don't know what it is now, but like a few years ago here, when I was working for PUSD, Quincy and Greenville went for like 3 principals in like a matter of like what, I was in for 7 and like, I don't know, it was just crazy, like you couldn't keep educators here for a variety of reasons. And I mean, that could just go, I mean, just, and then our parents wanting, I mean, how are our kids getting educated? How are we keeping educators here? And then when families are thinking about moving up here, if we're not really good, you know, access to great education, and we already have some of the retiring community thinking about what that looks like in the future. I know since I was in high school, our schools literally keep getting smaller and smaller every year. I mean, it was like 50 years ago, our schools were way bigger. Even when I was in high school, there were people like, oh yeah, and then, you know, my graduating class was 150 and mine was 56. And I know some classes are now like 25. Like, it's crazy. So like the just percentage of things is going down. And I think, yeah, the education piece and the amount of money that teachers are going to do.
Well, the education piece is directly connected to the land. Because there's 70% or 90% of our land that it's like, do you blow up the system or do you like fight through the system that it is? It's unfortunately schools are funded based on local taxes. And so in that paradigm, Plumas County has always been.
Also higher education.
Is there a chamber? Well, there used to be.
They still have Secure Rural Schools Act. And it's just like kind of random money, but it's a multifaceted funding stream.
But it's.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, do we fight in the paradigm or do you blow the paradigm?
Yeah.
What were you gonna say?
I wanted to, it goes back to really as someone who is not housed in this community and who has to move children. It's a really big problem for specifically artists, you know, artists can't, if artists aren't housed
How did they clean that?
So I have a question about that. Is this funding, can you explain a little bit about, like, so with this funding, would you apply to maybe renovate and create like an artist, like this, you know, an art studio with like housing up above or something, right? Like what could the funding, what types of things could the funding be used for? It's so funny because we did this little bit of research because we thought it would probably really help if when we go and have these conversations, we have a few ideas to come with just to jumpstart the conversation. And then, and so we put the word out, and almost without fail, we came back with wonderful visual arts ideas such as murals and sidewalks, and there was very little interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary or any other disciplinary. And we didn't want to share with you something that was so one-sided, because although we're going to, without a doubt, welcome the visual arts, we didn't want to stop. We didn't want to sort of, you know, have you all think that that was all that might be to it. So,
Well, and she's not here, so I'm gonna botch this up, and I wish she was here. The new county administrative officer, Deborah Lucero, is also an executive director at Butte County Arts Council. And at one of our state local partner meetings, she was talking, I believe we were talking about this program before the administrative organizations applied for it. And in Butte County, they did this housing thing. And like I said, I'm gonna botch it up, but they worked with people and made housing, and then like small housing, affordable housing, tiny houses. But they did it, and they did it with like ecological certified building materials or cinder block. They did it some inexpensive way, and then they used
houses.
yeah.
Yes.
And then they used art money and they made like a little community that was artful, beautiful, small houses. So they would, I mean, realistically, they're individuals or couples. It's not like a big family house. And then they made it a beautiful place to live. I mean, I think, but also part of our problem here is, you know, each of our communities is in these little valleys. And then once I mean, some of them have room for expansion, and there's certainly areas in Quincy where you could repurpose a few things. I mean, in almost every single one of the communities, there's old mill areas that have, but there's not a ton of room for expansion. You know, like when you talk about building more houses, you see in Truckee, they built a ton more houses, but they have room to grow. We don't have, most of our communities don't have that much extra room to grow.
Interesting.
But I think that, right, trying to like, so 1,000 things pop up when you said that. So I'm thinking about like what Tyler Kegel and Susan Weber are doing.
Right.
In Greenville, which is completely destroyed.
Yeah.
Basically, there's like 70 or 80% of the housing, the structure are gone. So when you start talking about, I think there is like, I can think of this space right over here that's for sale by the gas station, and like 4 or 5 little cabins, right? If you could turn that into like artist residence and then create, like, there's a huge backyard that can be landscaped beautifully and create some sort of like I think if you wanted to make an impact, right? So like, sure, people can come and do murals and stuff, and that's awesome. But if you want to make an impact, and we're talking about how to weight the grant metrics, right? So if you created somewhere in any of the communities, right? You created like tiny houses or whatever, right? Or transitioned a space that's already what's the word I'm looking for? Repurposed, thank you, a space, right? And you can house people, that's how, and you made it specific to artists. I think that's how you're gonna make the biggest impact, because that is the deal here. It's like, you can't.
So it's the housing is an issue for people to be here, but another thing I heard was with educational resources, it'd be really interesting for people to live in these houses.
Yeah.
Actually had a commitment as part of their agreement for being there, to be in the rural teaching.
Well, and like the hospital too, is that it's literally housing our nurses. Here is a huge issue, and so how do we get, doctors and nurses here if they don't have anywhere to live? So again, it's like people, we need these services, and now they don't have any.
So this goes back for me, right, you wanting cross sectors, so my brain started
Absolutely.
popping off. You're a filmmaker, we're filmmakers, we were talking with Chris Rudy, I don't know if any of you read the article that just hit Outside Magazine. It was fantastic, I highly recommend it. It's about the whole, and this is really relevant, this is where it all comes together, this is really relevant. I am a supporter of this Oregon Trail Stewardship. And I also think we need to look at other communities and be concerned with what's already happening. Right? We have to have, and we need our county administrators on board, we need to plan for, and there needs to be a certain amount of housing that is set aside. This is happening in communities across the nation. We need to be paying attention. So an article just came out in Outside Magazine, and it was about Telluride. And there was,
Telluride.
housing prices outside Magazine, Telluride, you'll pull it up. It was phenomenal. There was a guy who at the end of the article, this woman reached out to him and was like, she wanted to write a hopeful article about housing crisis and recreation communities. And unfortunately, the main character of it, he was still hopeful, but he actually was moving out of Telluride. He would run for city council and was super involved. They were putting together some really creative measures. Basically looking at second homeowners, they would pay a tax, an annual tax for having a vacant home, or they could avoid that tax by doing long-term affordable renters. There's some really cool things happening out there in these types of communities, and we are one of those communities. We do work with Syracuse all the time, but it's something that we need to be talking about, and I think that that's what good art does, right? Like, we could do skits about it, we could, whatever, I don't know, but I start thinking about the cross-sectional piece of it. So we were already talking with Chris Ruby about potentially doing a video piece about this, right? But then it's like, we're doing housing, my brain starts popping off with the cross-sector stuff.
Well, I think we're all in agreement here that the most powerful. Well, I think that art is expansive for lots of reasons, even if it's not necessarily an advocacy piece. But I think in this attribute, stories that are going to help educate or change minds, or because I want our community to be more beautiful, or but if we have all of these issues and the art is going to stop with the impact of kind of once it's done there, is there a way to try to fund projects that might have larger ramifications? But of course, that's difficult to know. I mean, will a video be looked at? Will a podcast be listened to? I mean, we won't really know, but that idea of might this have an impact that will not only be about this issue, but might help influence a solution. So I don't know, trying to educate home, one of the issues with housing is that people want to sell their homes, which is totally fair. We really need houses for people to rent, especially when you look at economics. People can't. And just keep going. I mean, housing prices are crazy. We're in this because of COVID, and I just talked about that right to now, the situation with cars, there's just with production and how this affects this area, particularly because of the lower economic way, that makes sense.
I have an idea. Love it. I have an idea. So Deborah Lacero is your new county administrative officer. And she just got back from Italy tonight. She's still until yesterday and literally flew in. Ray, are you still with us?
He is, and he has a comment.
Yes.
That,
My suggestion is that we have another meeting with Deborah, and I know she wanted to be present. And Deborah has been a colleague of mine for 6 years. We've worked very closely together. And it was actually Deborah that was sort of in part a mentor to me when I was writing the application for this. So she's definitely missing tonight. She had a board of supervisors meeting. She's still, she lives in Quincy during the week, and then at the weekend she's in Butte. But she had a board of supervisors meeting tonight in Butte, and that will come to an end in January. She'll be all yours. But I do suggest that between now and Thanksgiving, we kind of get together again and we have a formal conversation with Deborah present. I think it would be very helpful to implement this missing link.
Well,
She'll
I
have
think
so
it would
many
be
ideas.
very educational for her, because, you know, I mean, she's lived here less than 2 months.
Yeah.
And.
Well, can I make a comment?
Done.
Yes.
Point of
Right.
clarity? Can you guys hear
Yes,
me?
We
Okay.
can hear
Yeah.
you.
Okay, great. Yeah, her job actually starts November 1st. So we will
Ah,
start November 1st. She is no longer employed by Upstate Community Enhancement Foundation, Friends of the Arts. So I am the executive director. She is no longer the executive director. That's an important point because she's now all yours. And I just want to reflect back on the pallet shelter thing. As a supervisor, she helped secure the majority for the funds to be released for that to happen. And we are, Upstate is working on a grant now to help add an art element. Right now, it's just a bunch of white buildings with no landscaping in that into the process. So that's where that's at. And it looks positive. There's a lot of input. There's a lot of excitement about it. And that was really started by the Chico Housing Action Network chat, which has been working with the unhoused population for about 15 years. So a lot of partners, a lot of action going on about that. But I totally agree. A meeting with her will be great. And I also want to say, you know, I lived in Paradise for 24 years, and not unlike Plumas County, Paradise was 65% or more retirees because housing was cheap. I don't know if you remember back in the 80s, there were commercials on TV, buy an acre of paradise for $999. And they sold the crap out of these things in LA. That's how they built Magalia. So people were able to buy for $1,000 an acre of land and build a house. So when you have a majority of your population that is retired, they're over 65, they've already raised their kids. They don't have a great interest in the local school system because they don't have kids in there. And I think it's a similar challenge there because a lot of people retire, have second homes in Plumas County. And that, to me, that the fact that you can't keep educators because housing is ridiculously expensive and they keep leapfrogging out, that's a huge challenge. That's a huge challenge. And I agree with everybody. Housing is a major issue up there. I don't know what the solution is, but I'm just saying, you know, as you said, you have a wonderful hospital in Quincy, and again, it's hard to keep professionals. So
this is so helpful, and thank you also for clarifying about Deborah. It's marvelous that we now know that she starts formally at the beginning of November, so it's great. So Tara, maybe we can get an email going with Deborah and you know, even if I just drive up there on my own and we can look at this map kind of more informally, but with more people. Does that make sense?
yeah, just go to her. She'll be at the courthouse. Just go to her office.
Great, sounds good.
One thing that was interesting when Nina was explaining is, we know that rural challenges are different than urban challenges, but I think there's some major themes across like the West in California that I'm sure you'll hear over and over again, and how they like display will be different. But I keep coming back to like, what could this money do to, I don't know, like help support Plumas and Lord knows the archive. There's a little bit more. And one thing I kept thinking about was like, I feel like we need to recalibrate what communities look like in our minds. And we need to recalibrate what our forests look like in our minds. Like, if you draw a forest, $10 says you draw it too dense. And so I'm kind of wondering like what possibilities are there to kind of like recalibrate what it means to like live in communities, recalibrate like what does housing look like. I was thinking about your like the tiny home housing and like, if we had something like that had like a communal space like that, just having like. People being able to like experience or even like do that would just like, I think, blow. People's minds, or even like all the empty lots around town, if we did something. Like to tack up stakes, put the rules or be like, here's an empty lot and you can't build on it because of all these systemic reasons in California, it's expensive. But like, if we just highlighted what empty spaces are here in Plumas County, like, oh, there is a lot of space, but how do we highlight this unusable space?
That would be awesome.
So-
Following Google, how to build a better block. And that's something that could be replicated, you know that one?
No.
So you're gonna like it, because he was like an artist and a creative, and what they did, I forget what city, somewhere in Texas. And they staged all this like downtrodden part of town and got all his artist friends out. And they staged what downtown could look like. They printed plants and furniture, painted beautiful things, like that's how art inspires people to see what's possible. What was the name of the thing, how to build a better walk? And it's a TED talk, I don't remember the guy's name, but it's, 15 minutes, you guys are all. gonna enjoy.
One thing that could be interesting is if we highlighted all the empty lots and then like push the county and to lax buildings.
That's a great idea. It's a huge issue. Tracy Ferguson, you guys met Tracy yet?
No, the planning.
So Tracy's awesome, and she should like be included in this conversation.
So we have.
I mean, I passed it around the county,
You did
but I got the,
yesterday? No.
I got the newspaper article to pass around. I got it on Thursday. And so on Thursday, I got the press release out in the paper. I emailed it to a ton of county people and asked them to spread it around. They said they would.
Okay.
And then we got the Facebook event. Yes, 2 days ago, and I've been sharing. So the problem is that from the start of when Eliza and the team got their money to today, it's been like 2.5 weeks.
Yeah, no criticism.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
saying,
No,
right?
no,
It's the
yeah.
first of many conversations.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. So we're just here tonight and then don't tell any other county, but we'll come back again. I'll come back again, because in a way you've had the unfair start, you know what I mean? You're like, you're our guinea pigs, but everyone else will have had longer. We haven't even received the money yet. So we won't have that until, you know, close to the new year. But it also highlights the gap of the paper. So we used to get the paper every Wednesday. It was the best day of the week. We had.
Thank you for
85%. Patrick, you were great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye. We had 85% readership in the county. And there's like a missing vortex.
There is.
This is so common.
Yeah.
So many things that you've referred to this evening. You know, connected with second homeowners, hospitals not being able to keep good teachers and nurses and doctors, etc. This is what we experience in our community. It warms my heart, or chills it, rather. But so we're creating a website, and if it's actually live, and there is information on it, but it only came up today. It hasn't been properly branded yet. So if you go on it tonight, which you can, upstatecreativecore.org, you will be able to find information, but it will look completely different from how it does from a week today. So please don't share it. Looks like a sort of pharmaceutical organization at the moment. But I did, this is the Healthy Places Index. .org. It's really easy to find, and we'll share. We're taking your email addresses, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have the mailing list going around. I think I got. So I think I got everyone. If you haven't signed the mailing list, has anyone not signed and put their emails down?
Yes, it's only 5 minutes.
So, yeah,
It's, have you got yourself on?
Yeah.
he did, yeah. He was our first
Lovely. So who are we missing? Who has?
Nina.
Here, let me.
Nina and Earl.
Nina and Kate.
The Aster Gate is the other artist that I just keeps coming to mind, and if you're not a fan or know of his work,
Which artist?
the Aster Gates.
Oh,
He,
yes, okay.
yeah, Chicago-based, reinventing the city, reinventing buildings, reinventing the community.
Yeah, I love that. I honestly, it's almost about how do we create culture? You know what I mean? And how the definitions of culture, it's one of the most widely used terms, you know, literally in the dictionary, and it can mean so many different things to so many people. But it is about building community and building connection.
You know, one thing I'm just gonna flag is, as we move forward, thinking about how, see, these are all issues that are happening. The healthy issues you're talking about here, by the way, as from a rural community, but we are in any place that's been hit by a fire, the way it's happening. But now, as we look at the forecast of what will be happening in the Sierra communities especially, or even with this, but this is pretty dominant in the Sunland area, is that, I mean, the upstate area. Anyway, is we're gonna be hit more and more with fires, and the way of our choice of living all spread out rurally, you know, all over the place, is really gonna have to be shifting where, because it's so hard for firefighters to protect homes that are all spread out on 5 acres. And so if we're also looking at some of these issues in terms of where do we need to be going? What is it gonna be looking like 20 years from now? Can we be, you know, still fighting fires in that way? Or do they have to go to small, dense communities, tiny house communities with this community setting? So I think thinking also in this bigger picture of that direction of how communities can be going.
Redefining communities, I love that. I mean, and I particularly was touched that you used the metaphor of the forest, because having done this forest project, you know, you can actually track the history of forest management by looking at the diameter size of the trees. You know, it's old growth, large diameter, lots of space between them. White people moved from Europe, cut everything down, slash and burn, half of it's underground in the mines. And then what we get now is kind of second growth, very close together, small.
Well, and make
Density.
it illegal for native people to tend the land they.
Yeah,
they
it's
used
just,
to.
it's absolutely extraordinary. So no wonder that since all we know is the way we've managed it, we tend to think of a forest and, you know, draw forests far too densely packed. It's interesting. So how does that translate when we think of community? How is community in Plumas now compared to how we might redesign it in Plumas? And what kind of funds will you apply for to do what? So
And I just wanted to share the website, it's forestandfire.org.
oh, for that particular, yes.
Yeah,
Forest and fire. And
It was a really
dot
cool
org.
installation. It
Did
was,
you see it?
I didn't see, I just saw, I've seen, read something or saw, I don't know, maybe I saw the website. It was really cool.
So
It was an incredibly public.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a question about the money, we were talking about like how that would be distributed.
yeah,
Is, I know this is beginning, but when there's all of these issues and there's so many platforms for art, but is there gonna be like a thought on like, say, I don't know, let's just say like 10 different people submit a proposal for the same topic? Is there gonna be like, okay, there's this amount of money for water and fire and housing, and if there is there a way to like connect those people? Be like, we, you know, we want to fund this project and we feel like we both wrote very similar kind of proposal. What would you think about like, you know, combining or thinking about the cross connection, whether that, you know, somebody from public health is gonna work with, you know, Sierra Institute or whatever it is, and then you have a storyteller that's helping do that. I
love
just,
that.
you
That's
know,
the kind of thing we're looking at for sure. So it will either fund, the idea is that the artists get the money. And California Arts Council are designing it in such a way that normally its grants don't directly go to artists. They flow through into organizations that then employ artists. And with this particular grant, particularly understanding that these are workforce development funds from the governor's budget, from the state budget, the idea is that artists directly getting the funds to do meaningful work. However, if those artists are working in partnership with social service organizations, departments of government, units of government, arts organizations that might lend capacity to their work as artists, all the better. So it's going to be up to you, but I think partnerships are going to be critical in creating some of the sustainability, building the capacity, creating some of the longevity of the projects. Because there will be some kind of memory, there will be those partners will be left with a sort of trace DNA, which hopefully will propagate and keep future generations. Does that make sense? But so that's why I think they're going to have to be different. They're going to have to be some for artists who only know how to create extraordinary change through their work when they're working in isolation, but then also grants that fund projects where artists are working in organizations. So both.
Two things.
Not in the.
I found that article, it's called How to Save a Ski Town. It's in Outside Magazine, and it's by Gloria Liu.
How to save a ski town,
Anyway.
outside magazine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
more relevant to those, anyways, and then my husband did a film a few years back, and it was through Rob Wave. That's the one that I wanted to show tomorrow, but the quality is just because it's older, so it's not 4K. But anyways, it would, I feel like it's a perfect thing, right? It's the collaboration between the Forest Service and the kids, and getting the kids out on the land, and we have a program here in our schools called Learning Landscapes, where we talk about watershed, right? So you're talking about like, how water fits into all of this. Anyways, I'm trying to think of the name of it.
Well, let's
Maybe
go,
we
let's
send
send it. Come
No,
on.
I know, but the name of the video. I'll
You know
send it to
that
Kara,
girl.
maybe. Sure, get it to Kara. Anyways, yeah, that was a cool project where a filmmaker went out and basically told the story of all these intersecting collaborations.
It sounds absolutely amazing, and it looks like the next bunch of people want to come in. So we are going to be keeping in touch with Cara. Cara's in such trouble because we're now connected for life. And we already work as we work on different projects together across the state with our peer agencies. But Cara is going to be a fabulous resource for you and locally. And we'll be in touch all the time, and Cara can be in touch with us, you can be in touch with us, but Cara's going to be, we really want to also empower our local arts agencies as well, so.
And we could be available also for Zoom meetings.
Yes.
For instance, like the artist from her gallery, you said you worked with about 24 artists.
45.
45.
Amazing.
So, that could even be an option to hold a meeting for the artists for the gallery. for
Yeah,
instance,
Yeah,
you know,
and we
and
can
how-
just zoom in.
Yeah, and how maybe they can collaborate and create.
The only problem is they won't have the owl, I'll have to go.
We'll do we'll Zoom
This is
from our
amazing.
office in Nevada County and we'll have the owl set up.
Exactly.
One thing about, resources, too, being able to maybe you don't have the resources. And do so maybe creating some platform in which artists here, artists in any local community can either share the resources that they have, so that they don't have to travel. If they need things, that sort of building that community too, having a tool for them to communicate with each other.
Love it.
Yeah.
Better networks. Wonderful, well,
Thank
thank you so much.
And
And guys, thank you, all of those who joined by Zoom. Do we still have anyone with us?
We have Ray, I think.
Ray, thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Ray.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. You guys have quite a task.
Sorry.
Bye, Michael.